Wi-Fi when
How's it going? And welcome to episode 185 of On the Wire, proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. Follow the pod on the Twitter and on YouTube at On the Wire Pod. I am Adam Howe. You can follow me at 80 grade. That's all spelled out. Kevin Hasting can be followed at Hasting Kevin. We've got a great show lined up for you today as we look at the earliest possible version of ADP, everybody's favorite acronym, especially this time of year. Yes, I understand. It means absolutely nothing throughout the course of the season, but it's fun to talk about. And this is the argument for drafting early. It's like you try to see if you can find those diamonds in the rough, those players that you can get really late that are going to go at a very different time in in March. And you know, see what you got, see what kind of risks you can take. Kevin, you are adding to the ADP as we speak. How are you doing? And tell me how that draft is going.
doing great, Adam. Thank you. Hope you're doing well. I know you got a big weekend with your wife's birthday, so hope everything's going great for the both of you, your whole family. Draft's going pretty well. I'm pretty happy with it. We just got past the 13-14 turn. We're now into the 14th round. I think we started 3 or 4 days ago. It's going at a decent pace, not lightning quick or anything. I had the number one pick. I did take Ohtani, and yeah, things are going well. And it's been really interesting for the reasons you just brought up. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of what appears to be very uh, flamboyant recency bias. I think we're seeing
Right.
players that are performing very well in the postseason pushed up a little higher than I thought they might be,
Sure.
for example. So yeah, but it's so much fun drafting.
The whole playoff. I mean, we end up doing an episode revolving around the playoff
Yeah.
tax, if you will. But it is funny to see it happen in real time, like as the playoffs are still happening. We're doing that mock draft with in pitcher list, and we finally picked a third baseman. I don't know. I think we're in like the 18th round or something like that. And we finally got to a point where I picked Eugenio Suarez. But I was debating between Suarez and Max Muncy, and a lot of it had to do with the fact of how well Max Muncy is doing right
Right.
now in the playoffs, regardless of what he ended up doing last year or what platoon he was actually being put into. Anyway, I picked Suarez anyway, so it didn't really matter. But the fact that they were going neck and neck in my mind definitely had something to do with the playoffs.
Yeah, one that in the draft I'm in, I was a little surprised at where, and we'll talk about more of these guys throughout the show. That's what our subject of the show is going to be, basically. But Christian Walker, a guy that was injured uh, late in the season. So we didn't see him healthy at the end of the year, but everything I've seen, I don't think anybody is expecting him not to be full go for spring training. And he was the 12th or 13th first baseman taken in this NFBC draft I'm in. So I looked at our draft really quickly and glancing at it without looking at guys that might have multiple positions. Looks like he was the 7th, which is where I would expect. So I was a little surprised at how far someone like that dropped in an NFBC draft, and I can't think of any other reason other than him being injured in the second half.
Yeah, just that recency bias goes both ways, right?
Yeah,
So whether or not you forget
exactly.
about somebody, and they drop early on until you start doing more research and start realizing what's actually going on, or they had a second half to die for, and you're like, all right, well, fine. This is obviously what we talked about this last week. It's like this is obviously what they're going to do come April, because they're
Exactly.
back to back months, as we all know.
And they're
Um,
going to keep it up for all 6 months in 2025.
oh, of course. Oh,
That's the
absolutely.
plan. Yeah.
I don't. That's the plan. The plans always stick. We know this. This is science. Um, yeah, I mean, the whole idea of the show is we're going to take a look at the average draft position ADP that is currently listed on the NFBC platform. You got to do some filtering. If you go to the site and you look at ADP, you got to make sure you put in your dates. Otherwise, the ADP does get sucked it back in with 2024 drafts, as we are, granted, these are 2025 drafts, by the way. This is the vocabulary that happens between now and in December is always like all over the place in different podcasts. The way people reference last year or last season, last month.
Right.
These are 2025 drafts that we're talking about, everybody, even though obviously we are still in October 24. So if you are looking at ADP for whatever reason, just curiosity or whatever, make sure you're going in there and you're just filtering the dates. There's no need to filter out by type of drafts or leagues or whatever. This is 2 drafts. There's 2 drafts. And we're talking about this right before we start recording. Pretty sure they're both DCs. They're both 15 teamers that are, the draft champions, 50 rounds, 50 teamers. You are in an NFBC 50, which is the 12-teamer version of that. So obviously not as many players drafted, but pretty, definitely more than you would normally see in a FAAB league. So lots of opportunities there to learn the player pool and get to know some kind of get to formulate some strategies as you go further and further into draft season. But yeah, we're gonna look at the draft board. We are looking at it. Well, I'm looking at it from it's nice. You can, on the NFBC page, you can change between a true list and you can filter out positions. You can filter out, positions. And then, but you can also toggle to a draft board version. So I love that because it's color coded. It's what we're gonna see basically on our timelines on the Twitter for the next couple months as people copy and paste and show off their draft boards. So it's a nice visualization. And we're gonna just take a look at guys that are in like the first 10 rounds and any names that stand up, any trends that we see. Like, hey, I mean, I'm already seeing there's a round where all the catchers start going off the board. It's like we always see this in a draft. It's like, oh, there's the run on relievers. It's starting now. Catchers, these positions that like nobody really wants to like talk about until they have to. In the middle of the draft. And then we'll look a little bit further down on the draft board to see if there's any diamonds in the rough that we would expect to start moving up draft boards as the offseason rolls on and drafts continue to pile up. First and foremost, so how far are you into your draft right now, Kevin?
We're about 3 picks into the 14th round.
You just told me that, and I realized that.
Oh, it's all good.
That's great. So at just eyeballing the ADP in obviously your draft board, give me a name that just stands out as completely different in your current draft than what we're seeing in these other 2 drafts. Kind of putting you
Vinny
on the spot here.
Pasquantino is one that I noticed right away. That's an easy one for me to spot because I just drafted him in the 13th round. In our mock draft we did, we were looking at him and he had went much earlier than that, 8th round. And that's a 12-team league as well. So he went 5. I got him 5 rounds later in my NFBC 50 than he was taken in our Pitcher List podcast mock draft.
Yeah, 105 so far ADP. Obviously that will go up once your draft is put into the mix here, but we're talking at the top of the 9th round in these other two drafts. So why do you think he dropped so much? Is it just the 12-team the 12-team atmosphere versus these 15 teamers, first base in general, or like what made you think he dropped in this particular instance?
Well, it's weird, right? This is the same draft where Christian Walker was only one other first baseman was taken between Christian Walker and Vinny Pasquantino in the draft I'm in. That was Cody Bellinger. But um, the first baseman dropped quite a bit in my draft as a whole. Just glancing quickly, so not looking at guys that might be their primary position, but their first base eligible. It went roughly the same as what we've seen and what ADP is showing us. Yeah, we had Vlad and Freddie, Bryce Harper, Pete Alonso, right? Those guys, Matt Olson, those guys, all of those except for Pete Alonso did go in the first 3 rounds. No first baseman in the first round, though. That's a little different than we've probably seen in the past. And then everybody waited. It wasn't until the 8th round that Tristan Casas was taken. Then there's a Spencer Steer and Josh Naylor, and then the guys we talked about: Christian Walker, Cody Bellinger, Vinny Pasquantino. So there was a 4 or 5 round wait on first baseman in this particular draft. So that could have a lot to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering, like, I was as it was we were considering first baseman as I try to, fiddle away with our graphics here. I mean, this is, for those watching the video on YouTube, you'll see I'm throwing up the rolling chart for Process Plus for Vinny P last year. Big drop in power in the second half of the season. And this is that recency bias that we're talking about, with the idea that there's going to be some thought process behind how we finish the season. Now, how much you could put on to this as part of the injury that he was basically playing through and sustained. You're the House Royals expert here, Kevin. Like, how much stock do you put into that situation with him in particular, and can he bounce back to I mean, the first half was not anything to write home about. I mean, as far as like, we're just looking at Process Plus here, it was fine. Obviously, of Power obviously had the spurt here in the second and third months of the season. Do you expect that to come back as he's gets an entire off season to ramp back up and get healthy again?
Yeah, I do. I don't know if you saw any of the uh interviews that Vinny Pasquantino did during the postseason and he was showing his thumb. I think he even posted a close up of it on Twitter. It's nasty. It's got all kinds of stitches in it, a couple pins in there, so he could play in the postseason. And I really think, I mean, I would have to verify this with Kyle Bland or Scott Chu, but I think because these are rolling charts, that's why it just bottoms out, because this was a sudden injury. It's not something he played through for a while and then finally went on the IL. It was the base runner running into him on a play at first base, and he was on the IL immediately the next day. But I really think that is the case, and what we saw happening here. And he it he did have 7 home runs in August prior to that happening, right before September. I don't know if many remember when he was still in the minor leagues and we were following the "Was Vinny P called up today" on Twitter every day, and he
Remember
was hitting
that?
a ton of home runs in the minor leagues. We saw that come about in the RBI category for us this season. We still didn't see a ton of home runs. Now, 19 of them through August, and with August being his most prolific month hitting home runs. So maybe he would have gotten to push 25 home runs on the season, and that would look a lot different for a full season line for a first baseman. I have been noticing recently the lack of home runs from first baseman in general in 2024. We didn't get the power from the first base position that we are used to. Those of us that have been playing fantasy baseball for several years, there's the power just wasn't there for first baseman. I think that's going to continue to come for Vinny Pasquantino. He was a shoe-in for well over 100 RBIs. He had 97 with over a month of the season to go. So, um, yeah, I think that as long as he's going to continue to drop a little bit, or I shouldn't say it that way, I guess, because I don't know that he necessarily drops in every draft.
Sure.
He has been drafted as high as 86. That's sixth round of a 15 team draft. And what eighth round of a 12, which is where he went in our mock. So that lines up. I think maybe I was just lucky all these first basemen got pushed down in the particular draft I'm in.
I mean, every draft ends up having something about them. You're like, oh, I can't believe
Yeah.
this happened, or like this is completely different than what we've seen on ADP, whether it's an individual player or a whole string of one position, of course, as well. Yeah, and I should clarify, as I'm referencing ADP in this physical, this visual draft board, it does put it in a 12 team format. So if you hear rounds coming from me, I'm more than likely referencing what it would be in a 12 teamer. Something that we talked about we talked about it on a previous episode. We talked about it when we were starting off this little mock draft that we are doing with Pitcher List, is just the state of second base. And the fact
Yeah.
that, we ended up grabbing Ozzy Albies. I think it was in the third round of this 12 team mock draft. And ultimately, it's because we know what Albies can do in a full season if healthy, and that's what you're obviously banking on. ADP of 51.5. So we're again 12 teamer. We're talking at the top of the fifth round, that 4/5 turn, where he's going. The second baseman. Sorry, Mookie's on here. He's not colored in second base red. So
Right.
he's still eligible. Well, he'll regain second base eligibility going into next year. That's another thing to point out. If you are looking at ADP on NFBC, they have not updated position eligibility yet. So if you are looking at, especially from a list perspective, you're going to see some positions associated with some players that may not be where they start off 2025 with, including second base for Mookie Betts. Again, NFBC has the 20 game limit that they had to have appeared in at least 20 games at the position the year before in order to carry it over to 2025. Mookie will have outfield and shortstop. I would venture to guess he will gain second base back early on in April, if not the first full week of the season, assuming he's the starting second baseman for the Dodgers and they don't make some weird offseason move. But anyway, Albies is the one that stood out to me here as ultimately the second baseman off the board, but so late. Is position scarcity just not a concern this early on, do you think? And do you think as people start really diving into position scarcity or just concerns about particular positions, that they will start moving up not only Albies in the fifth? I'm talking about Altuve was the next second baseman off the board in the seventh. And then we get Semien in the ninth, but then a couple of second basemen go in the 11th. So it's like people are is it just playing chicken with the rest of your league, hoping that everybody's going to continue to push this down? Or do you make that move early on to be like, I'm not worrying about this. I gotta get my second baseman early.
It appears to me that the two drafts were vastly different in that respect, right? Mookie Betts went in about the same spot. He's a first rounder. And Ketel Marte, there was about 12 pick difference. So that's a full round in a 12. I guess 14 pick difference between the two. But that's the thing, right? The two different drafts, we know exactly where these guys went. I am making the assumption, and this is an assumption, so it may not be correct, but I'm making the assumption that the men pick for these second basemen was the same draft and the max pick was
Yeah,
the same
sure.
draft, right? Because they are so vastly different after you get past the first couple. We have a 50 pick difference in where Marcus Semien was taken. Pick 80 in one draft and pick 130 in the other. We have nearly that big of a difference for Matt McLean, 99 in one, 144 in the other. Bryce Terang, 101 and 163. So I really think it completely depends on who starts, who decides, all right, I'm going to grab one of these guys because I don't want to wait much longer. There's not very
Right.
many of them. Yeah, and then everybody else follows, or a handful of people in the league do follow and do the same thing. I was thinking about this as well. I'm glad you brought this up because I like the way that we've talked about Nick Pollock in the past saying you have to have a plan for second base, right? Notice he doesn't say you have to grab a second baseman early.
You just have a
He
plan.
says
Yeah.
you have to have a plan.
Sure.
Right. So when I'm looking at the auction calculator with 2024 year to date stats and then go to second baseman, right? It's really intriguing to me that we have all of these second basemen with very little power but decent batting average and a whole lot of stolen bases, right? When we start talking about Bryce Terang, Michael Garcia, who is second base eligible going into 2025, right? There's several of them when I was looking at the list earlier. Nico Horner, right? With guys that we have complained about for their performance in 2024. But if we plan for the fact that we're going to get a second baseman to get us some stolen bases, not hurt us in batting average, score some runs, and we know going in we're not getting any power, so we can adjust for that while we're drafting our other players. That is, I think, a very viable plan for second base. Having a plan for second base, once again, doesn't mean you have to grab one early.
Yeah, it's just setting the bar, like knowing exactly what you're going to get out of something. You set those expectations, and when you set the bar at a reasonable level, and that way they can hit it, and it can fit in the rest of the plan of the rest of your roster, right? So it's like you don't
Yep.
like if your plan is to get the best possible second baseman, sure. I mean, go ahead and grab, Marte or Albies or whoever at the, in the top 5 rounds of your draft. But then you need to have a late round plan for something else, because ultimately every pick you make in the first 5 rounds has an effect on what you're going to be able to get later on. You can push up whatever position you want, but you're gonna need to make a plan for something else. So yeah, I mean, I think knowing where those not only those tiers, but where those cliffs are, and being okay to jump off the cliff because you're jumping into a pool of the same player. You know what I mean? Like, it's like once you jump off that cliff, it's not like there's a bunch of small cliffs that you might hit on your way down. It's like from here, and then you're down, and then that's where everybody else lives. It was the way I was looking at. Honestly, it was the way I was looking at third base in this other draft that we're doing. That's why we ended up grabbing Suarez so late. And I was like, I could have felt okay picking Suarez like 3 rounds prior, but I'm like, if I don't get Suarez, and I end up getting Muncy, and if I don't get Muncy, I end up getting somebody else. And I felt like all of these guys were like just like mimics of each other. And you're just, as long as you knew exactly what you needed to get out of it, you're good. So I love the way you kind of worded that. It's like, you just clarify.
Yeah.
You just have
Like
to have a plan.
we're in the 14th round of the draft I'm currently in. I do not have a player on my roster that qualifies at second base. But the guys I just mentioned are all available. A couple of guys I didn't mention that fit the same bill. Bryson Stott, 32 stolen bases last year, 245 average, doesn't hurt you. He's still available.
Mhm.
Andres Jimenez, we talked about him last week, that the stolen bases were there. A little disappointing season, but a 252 batting average and 30 stolen bases, there's value there, especially at a position that we don't think we can get a lot of value from in the mid rounds, right? I think these guys that are hanging on till later, don't uh, if I don't get Mookie Betts, if I don't get the guys at the top, Albies like we did in the draft, Marte, I was hoping that Marte would fall to the 2-3 turn. Um, oh no, he went in the third round. I must have changed my mind. But he went in the third round. I must have changed my mind. Yeah, but yeah, I think that is for right now and for the next few drafts I do. My plan for second base, I think, is I'm going to get decent batting average and at least 30 stolen bases, and I'm going to worry about the other categories with other picks at other positions.
Yeah, you have it open probably right now. You can remind me. One of my favorite picks so far that we've made in this other draft has to do with second base, and it's our backup second baseman. It's Ceddanne Rafaela of my Red
Mhm.
Sox. Sarah Sanchez said in our chat, who's drafting alongside Shelly Vershate, it was not a snipe because didn't have a pick like until 14 picks after ours, but they were still upset about it. And as Sarah put it, this is Mookie Betts light. It's just with the position eligibility, at least in Yahoo, second base, shortstop, and
Mhm.
outfield. But clarify for me if I've stalled long enough for you to look it up. I know he's probably doesn't have second base in NFBC going into next year. Is that accurate?
Oh, let me look real
But anyway,
quick.
I mean, he's showing up in orange on this draft board. So obviously he had second base eligibility going into 2024 or
Shortstop outfield for
yeah.
2025.
So I don't know if he'll regain second base eligibility in 2025 based on the roster construction for the Red Sox. It really depends on what Trevor Story's situation ends up being and what position he ends up kind of filling in for the Red Sox. But Rafael is like just that one guy that you can, at least currently at 185 ADP. I don't know where he went in each individual draft. But to get him at the top of the 13th round in a 15 teamer, with 2020 potential with multi eligibility seems like one of those that's like, it's not so much a steal, but it like seems like really good value. And I expect that to change as the season moves on. Well, let's see. We got a couple of other trends that at least popped up for me. I'm sure you've seen some things too, especially being in an active draft. We'll get to all those, but we got to take a quick break. All right, so the trend I wanted to talk about, because it's obviously very different if you're playing in the NFBC where you have a two catcher league and you're used to that versus any other place where most standard leagues are single catcher leagues, Yahoo, CBS, whatever. So obviously our mock draft we're doing is Yahoo based single catcher league. Catchers drop tremendously. Um, I finally we ended up grabbing Shea Lingliers to the
Mhm.
chagrin of Kyle Bland, our director of analytics over at Pitcher List. He was hoping he would drop another round, so I felt good about that. If Kyle wanted him, then I really felt good about him. Even I wanted him
Absolutely.
after our discussion we had the other day. In this draft board, though, um, it we're expecting catchers to get to be moved up on draft boards in general, but it seems as though there's a lot more of them early rather than like I felt like last year there was like that top 10 and then cliff and then people just kind of left the position alone for a little while, and then started maybe double tapping if you hadn't gotten one of those top 10 guys a little bit later on. It seems as though there's a bunch up in rounds 5 through 7. We've got Rutschman, we got Salvi, we got Will Smith, Cal Raleigh, Logan O'Hoppe, Contreras, all in those like 5, 6, 7 round area. And I think we talked about, a lot of us talked about the idea that there's this catcher renaissance coming, or we were living in the middle of the start of it. I don't feel like we got that. Am I missing something? I don't feel like we got that in 2024 to the extent that we were expecting. Are you expecting more of the same, or are you putting a little bit more emphasis in the catcher position going into 2025?
I am being very careful not to forget that, especially in two catcher leagues, not forget about catchers. I'm going to be very, very careful. I don't necessarily have to have William Contreras. Excuse me. I will consider him where he's going. In some drafts, I will probably end up with him. I don't have to have him. I don't have to have Yainer Diaz is going second catcher off the board in most of the drafts I've seen. I don't necessarily have to have one of the top guys, but there's about 10 or 11 guys, and it's the number one thing that it's based on is plate appearances. And then I break each player down by which categories are their strengths and which ones are their weaknesses and which ones are really going to hurt me, and if I can withstand that. But yeah, there's about 10 or 11, and I want two from that group. And the reason is very simple, because I'm going to get about 1,200 plate appearances from my two catchers, assuming health. Yeah, I know that's a
Sure.
huge assumption, especially with catchers. But as soon as you get down to the, this is two catcher leagues I'm talking about here, because in a one catcher 12 team league, I'm I'm not taking a catcher till the end, because I'm
Right.
happy with these guys at the bottom. I'm fine with them, but I want two of them. Even in a 15 team two catcher league, I still want both of them out of this group. And it's about plate appearances. You're getting a free player, an entire free player, as long as they're helping your team and not detrimental to it, right? I'm basically playing with three catchers while most teams will be playing with one, basically, because as soon as you get down to 15th in ADP, we're already in the 300s in plate appearances for the season, right? So if you're drafting two guys late, waiting on catcher, you are not going to get over about 700 plate appearances. Where if you take two of the top 10 guys, you're looking at 12 to 1300. That's a whole nother player. That's the main reason I'm doing this.
No, I mean, I don't think it's been really talked about in that way. At least we haven't talked about it in that way. So that's great insight there. I mean, we talked about how, the volume out of the catcher position can be more harmful if they are going to, suck your batting average and not actually produce. Um, but that volume that you can get out of the position that you just don't get in most cases can be, yeah, like you said, give you an extra player. Especially if you're able to add a guy that is playing not only every day, but like every day and switching between DH and catcher. And so they're not just playing first base too. They're, getting off their feet on the field. So you have the Rutschmans of the world. You have, I mean, the Will Smith at one point was putting up those kind of plate appearances. And then
Still is.
as soon as you get to like, Stevenson, it's like you don't know if he's going to get the extra plate appearances through being a DH like he once was. You also don't know if he's going to get hurt again. And so you start hitting those question marks as soon as the Stevensons of the world. That's, the middle of the 9th round where his ADP is currently. Shane Langeliers is somebody who goes right after him in ADP that we talked about recently. And taking advantage of being able to get the extra plate appearances in the ballpark that he's going to be playing in.
Yep.
Who actually
He's in my group, and also Tyler Stevenson is actually in my group of the group I want two of those catchers, because this was his second consecutive year with over 500 plate appearances. After it, I don't know if people remember, he had some serious issues with concussion
oh yeah,
a couple of years ago, and even when he was playing, he wasn't performing well, and he was in and out of the lineup. And we saw this most recently with Anthony Rizzo, who gets a lot more press than Tyler Stevenson, so people know what I'm talking about. And I really think now that we're 2 years removed from that, we're beginning to see the Tyler Stevenson that we got really excited
excited
about
about
going
yeah.
into 2022 after what he'd done in just 400 plate appearances in 2021. So I he's in that group for me. He's at the low end, obviously, being in the low 500s in plate appearances the last 2 years, when there's five guys that are over 600 now. But he's still in that group, and yeah, I think he's a fine second catcher, or even a one catcher league. If I'm taking the last catcher, I'd be happy with Tyler Stevenson.
Are the Tampa Bay Rays going to play in Oakland next year? I hope that
I've
happens.
seen this. I've seen some of that. Ugh, I
I love it. I've seen it too.
yeah,
I think Bowden put it like, where are they going to play? And then everybody's commenting like, Oakland
yeah,
has an amazing opportunity ahead of themselves right here.
yeah, yeah.
Oh man, I
I
hope
don't
that
know.
it won't happen. I'm just putting it's not gonna happen. I hope it does though.
Right.
Sorry. It popped in my head when we are
No,
talking
that's
about
great.
talking about Langoliers going into the new ballpark and then it clicked. I'm like, oh, actually a team might be playing in Oakland. Um
And
what
while we're still talking catchers a little bit, we talked about this with the stolen bases gone. We're not the only ones not drafting JT Realmuto.
mm, oh,
He's outside the top 10, and he's perennial number one. Not quite last season, but he was still top five. JT Realmuto has dropped a long ways compared to where we're used to seeing him on draft boards.
I mean, we used to see him go in the third round.
Right.
In
Where
mid
William Contreras is going.
exactly. And then even in the fifth round where Rutschman's going right now, and now he's going at the 9-10 turn, in a 15 teamer. And so yeah, that's some of these names. Any other names, I guess let's just stay in the top 10, 12-ish rounds that really stand out to you as either being guys that have like completely changed from previous years, where their ADP is, or guys you're just like, I have no idea why this guy's going in the top 10 and I expect him to drop considerably. Simply if due to the fact that we only have two drafts that are making up this ADP.
Right.
Let's not forget that.
Yeah, exactly. This is very, very early. I think, right, there was I'm seeing some pretty wide variance in some of the young guys that performed very well as rookies in 2024, and we were kind of curious to see, after Jackson Churio hit his second home run in the same playoff game, I tweeted Jackson Churio 1-1, right? And I have seen him drafted in the first round. He didn't go till the middle of the third round in this 12-team draft I'm in. I was a little surprised that he lasted that long. Uh, I I thought I might have gotten a little carried away. I took Brent Rooker at the 4 or 5 turn, first pick of the fifth round, ahead of Jackson Merrill, Seiya Suzuki, Michael Harris, Wyatt Langford. And I thought, oh goodness, am I just out of my mind? Went and looked at a couple other drafts, and sure enough, he's going ahead of those guys.
Yeah,
Maybe not all of them in every
sure.
draft, but sure enough, he is. So I was like, I mean, that made me feel a little better. And then I thought, no, that shouldn't make me feel better. The whole point of these
to
early
get.
drafts is not looking at ADP when you're
Yeah, yeah.
drafting, right? So, but at the same time, it was a little reassuring when I started looking at some of the names I had jumped with him. But yeah, him uh, seeing that is about where he's going, around in the top 50. He's a top 50 overall fantasy baseball player, even in the drafts we're seeing right now. I love to see it. Very happy for the guy.
All right, I got two names I want to throw at you, and these are names that we had talked in our DMs. And first and foremost, I shot you a first base ask question in a text,
Hmm.
and the name that stood out from that. Actually, you know what? Here we'll give everybody the names that I asked you about. It, as that first base, it was a first base ask. So it was Alec Burleson, Cody Bellinger, and Vinny P. We already talked about Vinny P. So the spoiler, the answer was Burleson because Vinny P actually wasn't available. And so we ended up going with Burleson as our first baseman late on. But Bellinger is the one that stood out to you the most of that group as being the guy you're avoiding, at least of that group. He went considerably higher from where we were considering drafting in this ADP at 127 between these two drafts. We're talking about mid ninth round in a 15 teamer. What is it about Bellinger that has you just completely avoiding, especially at this kind of an ADP? Because we were considering draft, he was still available much further on in our mock draft.
Uh, I I had a really good reason at the time, and I don't remember what it was.
Oh,
But so I'm gonna look really quick and see if it pops out to me. Um, I is he a free agent?
I think he has I think the Cubs have an option on him. I'm gonna check that.
Like, that might have been part of it. I remember that I was only going to be interested in 2024 if he was back with the Cubs, which he was. Um, I think he looks comfortable there. I missed out on the 2023 that Bellinger had. I had no interest, and the fact that he kind of went backwards again after 2023 and wasn't as good as in 2024 is reassuring to me in my personal bias that I'm not a Bellinger fan. Um, his MVP season, he had one amazing month, and the rest of the season wasn't even good, let alone MVP. That's how front loaded his MVP season was. But yeah, I would much rather have either Burleson or Vinny Pasquantino than Bellinger. But that
Bellinger
is
is
not
a
how he's being
player
drafted.
option.
Now he is being um in the draft I'm in. Well, it's because Bellinger was the first of the three taken, uh, and in our mock, I guess that makes him the third since Vinny wasn't available, and we went with Burleson there. So yeah, I think we're gonna see. He's one of those players we're gonna see a lot of variance on. I don't know when I would finally pull the trigger, but I doubt he falls far enough for me to pull the trigger on Cody Bellinger. And you know what? I might not have a great analytical reason. It's just a bias I've had for his entire career.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't look that great. I mean, I pulled up his rolling chart on Process Plus again, referencing that, and contact's still great, but like absolutely no power, making terrible decisions all year round, whether injured or not. He does have a player option, so I venture to guess he's going to exercise that. I mean, that's just my guess. I haven't seen any news that he's made that decision, and he doesn't have to make it right away. At least during the playoffs. I don't know what the deadline is for that, but he has a player option for both 2025 and 2026, assuming, and I don't have his full contract details up, but assuming that it's, in the AAV of his last 3-year contract, we're talking, $26 million. I think he'll exercise it if that number is correct. But we'll see. We'll see what he ends up doing. The other name
I
that
got one
stood
out of
up,
left field for you.
yeah.
I got one out of left field for you. As a Red Sox fan, I have a question, and he's not a top 10 round guy, but I am currently in a draft where David Bednar and Kyle Finnegan just got drafted. Is Liam Hendricks the closer for Boston next season?
Yes, yes. I am hoping to grab him as like the last pick of this mock draft that we're in, because I just think he's
So
completely off the radar.
when do you have to take him in a 12-teamer? Right after Brandon Finnegan gets drafted? Like
When you
now?
have to pick
Probably.
him, yeah, when you have to pick him, or when you in a 12-teamer, I have no problem pushing him up. It's one of those things that's like in a 12-teamer, I
Yeah.
would push him up. In a 15-teamer, I would not. Is because you can take those added risks, and you can,
I feel like I need a third closer earlier than most people take a third closer, because my second closer is Pete Fairbanks. So I
oh,
feel like I
yes.
need to find a third one. And guys like Finnegan's already gone. Yeah, Liam is going to go into the top of the queue.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I've got my eye on him. I kept him in my dynasty league. I just think he gets first shot. Whether or not you'll know April 1st whether or not he's the closer and whether or not he's going to hold up. You're going to know right away, and you can make your decision in the first FAAB period, maybe the second FAAB period. But I do believe that the Red Sox give him he is not even showing up though on this ADP. There's no way he wasn't drafted in here. Oh, there he is. 307 ADP of these two drafts. Right between Matthew Boyd and David Peterson. In ADP. I'm looking to see who the next like reliever is on this board, and I'm not seeing one. Foley from Detroit.
Foley. So he's
Uceta
going
was
ahead of
right after
Foley.
Romano. Oh, geez, if I need to, wow, I didn't realize he was going with these guys. Yeah, I might grab Hendricks with our next pick in this mock draft, but it's a mock draft. It's just fun to talk about.
Exactly. Yeah, even so that is interesting. Griffin Jacks is going ahead of him by a little bit.
You can
But
take these risks
yeah,
in these early drafts.
even Jeff Hoffman is drafted a couple of rounds ahead of him. So he in the two, and he went almost 100 picks apart in the two drafts that we're looking at the ADP of. So that's probably one of them. He's going, right around some of these other guys that we're talking about, and ahead of his min is earlier than Griffin Jacks. His min is earlier than Hoffman, I believe. Oh no, it's not. But in the one draft at least. So maybe the other one he was just completely forgotten about by drafters, because the default ranking in the draft rooms right now, NFBC, is 2024 ADP.
Right.
So it's pretty there's some guys you have to type in to find them. You're not just, even if you keep scrolling forever, you're not going to get to them. So that's another tip for those that start jumping in some
Or
of these
in the
early
draft
drafts.
room.
Yeah.
I have a, you know what? Now that you brought this up, I have another ask for you, and I'm gonna ask you that right after this break. All right, staying in the topic of these relievers, I'm gonna put Liam Hendricks in there in this mix. I'm gonna throw in Griffin Jacks for you because that's the name you threw out there, and I think Griffin Jacks has a lot of value in these types of drafts these are DCs, right? And so like even if Jacks doesn't get closing opportunities or as much as you may hope due to his skill set because of John Duran being, there in Minnesota, he's still going to be a guy that you can lean on, that you can throw into your rotation in a DC in a pinch. We talk about these guys in FAAB leagues all the time, like the guys you want to just rotate in to chip away at ratios and all that good stuff. The third guy I'm going to put in here is Luke Weaver, going much. He's going before both of these guys, at least in these two drafts, at 232 ADP. The question, he's already gone in our mock draft as well. And when that name came up, Eric Samolsky said the same thing in our draft room. He's like, is he even the guy? Like, is he even a closer next year? Like, the Yankees don't go out and get somebody to fill that role. Obviously nobody trusts Clay Holmes anymore. And, Luke Weaver they have a team option on him, and it's not that much money. So they're, to expect to bring him back. So I'm going to lump those three guys in there. I always ask you, avoid stream keep Luke Weaver, Liam Hendricks, and Griffin Jacks in a draft that you're doing right now.
I'm going to keep Liam Hendricks. I feel like I know he missed a lot of time. I know I know he had to, like, no energy going through all the rehab he had to do after dealing with cancer. I understand he might not be the same guy. However, he wasn't dealing with any arm troubles, right? So I feel like he's going to come back being the same guy he was. And like you said, we'll know pretty quickly. But drafting right now, he's my keep. For all the reasons you said, Griffin Jacks is my streamer, because that's what he is right now. Now, I'm not so certain at some point Minnesota might not throw him in the ninth inning more often, even with a healthy Duran. That would be great if you have him. Even if they don't do that, like you said, he can be valuable to our teams. Luke Weaver, I love what he's doing. I love seeing it. But I couldn't agree more with the sentiment that we're talking about the New York Yankees. He is closing games for them because they don't have a choice right now. And if they, and as well as he has performed until the little hiccup was that on Thursday, they finally got to him a little bit. Yeah, it's great, but I feel like, yes, the New York Yankees will bring in an established ninth inning guy, and then they'll love if Luke Weaver continues to perform how he is. Then that they have an amazing setup guy that can go more than 3 outs, and that's great. I think that's part of it too. He's very valuable going more than 3 outs. You don't want to be doing that with your closer all season long. I don't feel like I feel like that you wear him down that way. But when he's a setup guy, they may not have to use him as often, or at least give him a couple days when he does go out and get 5 or 6 outs. There's multiple reasons where I see Luke Weaver not getting saves next season. Doesn't mean he won't, but there's multiple paths for that to be the case.
Yeah, I feel like this happened with Kimbrel before he had a job, type of thing, where you could get him extremely late and you could roll the dice and be like, great, and then all
He
of a
got
sudden
drafted ahead of Lucas Erceg, who I feel like is definitely Kansas City's closer going forward in the draft timing. He got drafted in the 6th round. Listen to this, 6 pitchers went consecutively, and 2 of them were to me because I didn't have any starters yet. But this is where Luke Weaver went. Coming back down in the 6th round, it went Garrett Cole, Andres Munoz, Luke Weaver, Blake Snell, Michael King, Shane McClanahan. Which one doesn't belong? It's pretty simple for me.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's exactly where I was going. Is like there, even in this ADP, you see Urzek went earlier than that, but then you're just not getting the discount here on guys that don't have jobs. Kenley Jansen, Carlos Estevez, Luke Weaver, for that matter, Clay Holmes, in the same group. It's like they don't have a job to speak of and you would expect to be able to get these guys at least a couple rounds later than that, and then hope that they get a job, and then you just struck gold. The interest rate is already baked in, as if they had a job. And like, I don't expect guys like Estevez or Jansen to go up much higher. If Jansen gets a job somewhere where
Duran
he's
was
the
still on the
closer,
board.
he's still going. He's still going in that range. Like maybe he gets bumped up 2
Yeah.
rounds, but like, yeah, I don't know. Relievers are always a fun topic of conversation.
By the way, can you tell I listened to all the podcasts that Nick was on last week with my first 2 starters being Michael King and Shane McClanahan?
I have absolutely no doubt.
Heard those names multiple times last week listening to Nick.
Yeah, Nick put out
I
his
believe
top
he said
200.
6th and 8th right now in his rankings, I believe is
Yeah,
what he said.
thereabouts. So yeah, look for those top 200. His top
I
200.
like a name Uncle Ted put out here. I think Porter Hodge keeps the job in Chicago. I would take him ahead of Luke Weaver.
Oh,
He's
sure.
not even a consideration yet in these drafts.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. Um, the other name that we talked about that I asked you about, he still hasn't gone in our draft, but ADP of 133, we're talking the end of the 9th round in a 15-teamer, is Jason Dominguez. Overall thoughts that you gave me in your short snippet were not so
Mhm.
positive. I'm assuming, where did he go? Has he gone, first of all, in your 12-teamer? And if he hasn't, where do you expect him to go?
He doesn't appear that he has. Um, I I surprised myself, and I think I added that to my response to you when you asked me about him. I was kind of shocked at the lack of power thus far. I know he's still really young. He can still develop much more game power. We know he has the raw power, but I was still very surprised at how little power we've seen from him in game. And I believe the name I gave you was I can get what he's been doing or what it appears to me, what I would project him for 2025. I'm not talking dynasty here, but I can get that from Leody Taveras. I think is the name I gave you. And
It
that
is.
was shocking to me when I came across that and was looking at what comparing the two. So yeah, no, he has not been drafted yet in the draft I'm in. But I'm trying. I don't even know where he would come up. Um, I think we would. He's definitely. This is a right. This is a draft and hold draft. So he's definitely going to get drafted.
Of course.
Um,
But just the fact
I'd
that he went,
probably take him. I would take him ahead of Jared Kelnick. I don't know where he's going to go yet, but I'm just kind of looking down to the available players.
sure.
I think I would have a really tough decision. I think between Jason Dominguez and Lars Nootbaar. Um,
But
I don't.
this is the type of
I don't know. I don't know
position.
where that puts him. I'm gonna be interested when we start running out of full-time players, right? Because I think he will be or close to it. He might get rest days, but I don't think he'll be a full-blown platoon like we were hearing could have been the
Sure.
case if he had come up right at the beginning of September. He didn't come up for a few days later. I think he'll be, for the most part, a full-time player, but I don't think I'm interested until that's all I'm interested in. Like I
Right.
said, when I'm looking at guys like Leody Taveras, that's where I'm going to be interested.
Especially if the
And
Yankees don't bring
it
back
sucks
Soto.
me. If I hadn't looked, if I hadn't looked at some numbers, he probably would have been the guy I told you we should draft.
Yeah. And I think that's where he's being drafted right now. Like guys that are just like, it's on name recognition. He's going in between a Rosarina, Ian Happ, Parker Meadows, Colton Cowser in the outfield ADP here. And it was just, yeah, it was like he
I
was
don't know
not a
what to think
consideration
about
for
a
me at that point.
Rosarina's down year yet. I haven't really looked. I apologize. I just talked over you, Adam. Completely apologize. Because I'm not looking at you at the moment. But uh, of those names you answered, with the possible exception of a Rosarina, because I haven't looked at why I think he might have had a down 2024 yet. Haven't looked much at a Rosarina, but all of the other names you mentioned, I would take ahead of
Uncle Ted in the chat, mentioned earlier that he'd pick PCA, Picaro Armstrong over him, and he
I
went
would right
just
now.
like he just went 4 or 3 outfielders after him in this ADP of these 2 drafts, and so he's
Mhm.
like right in that same mix as it stands. Obviously, somebody has already done that. So yeah, just thought it was a name that was like it's one of those you're gonna find these players in this ADP board that are being drafted on name recognition alone. It's like people who, honestly, there's gonna be somebody
Absolutely.
in each draft that's like, I just want to get into a draft. I haven't done any research. This would be fun. Oh, I can't believe anybody hasn't grabbed Jason Dominguez yet. I know that guy. He's gonna be great, and he very well may be. He very well might be. But the fact that you see his ADP so high in these 2 drafts, I was also a little surprised by that. Going further down, have you and does any name kind of pop up to you as being the early favorite for like the diamond in the rough, the guy that's like, oh, in these 2 drafts, this guy should be going way higher or will be going way higher once everybody starts like jumping on board?
I've been really intrigued by the starting pitching at every draft board I looked at. I know it's really early. I understand some people don't like. It's not just that pitchers get moved up in March. It's also that we still have 5 months before they get to throw a pitch in a game, and uh, but they're going to be working out. That's 5 months of injury risk that we're not typically worried about with position players in the off season, but we are with pitching. So I think that's part of it. But the stark differences in some of the different drafts. Now we went pretty close in the 2 NFBC drafts that have been completed and are showing up on the NFBC ADP. But Jacob DeGrom is fascinating to me. Um, we we got him in the 6th round of our mock draft, towards the end of the 6th round. In the NFBC draft that I'm currently in, I was hoping to get him at the 4 or 5 turn. He went at the 3-4 turn as the 8th starting pitcher off the board. And in ADP, he's the 6th pitcher off the board. So it's just crazy. And there was I saw some things on Twitter today. Joe Arico put out his top 10. The
Mhm.
comments, of Joe Arico's top 10, where he has Jacob DeGrom ranked 3rd, were like, people just think it's absolutely crazy that Jacob DeGrom is being drafted at all, it sounds like. But I think we're forgetting, right, that his elbow is repaired, right? I know he's had other injuries throughout his career, but his elbow is repaired. I think I am less worried about Jacob DeGrom's injury history than I've been since 2019. 5 years, right? I think if Jacob DeGrom is healthy and looking like Jacob DeGrom in spring training, he's a first round draft pick on the final weekend of main event drafts in Las Vegas. I think he will go in the first round, and as at worst, the 2nd pitcher off the board, if not the 1st pitcher in some drafts. I think it's that big a deal. And the what appears from the ADP and where we're seeing him go in some drafts, there's somebody in every room that agrees with me But it sounds like the general discourse is people are still really, really worried about Jacob deGrom as an injury risk, and of course he is. All pitchers
Pitchers
are.
are,
I
yeah.
think he's probably less of one than he's been in a long, long time.
Yeah, it's just the honeymoon phase, right?
Right.
Coming back from the surgery, you get
I
those 300
I
innings.
can't remember who it was. I think um because he's had a Tommy John surgery in the past, Jacob
Right.
deGrom. It was like 9 years ago. Uh, and I think I saw somebody tweet, and I forget who it was, so I apologize. 300 innings pitched before he missed any time after that Tommy John. And that's kind of what we've come to expect, right? That's that honeymoon you're talking about.
Exactly. I think that another trend, if you these are DCs, these are the draft and holds, 50 rounders, and I think as I'm looking in the bottom 10, and when I say bottom 10 in ADP, if you look at it the way I'm looking at it, it actually goes 55 rounds because obviously some players didn't get drafted and other people did, and so they average them out. There
Mhm.
are a lot of just like playable players in the very bottom rounds of these 50 teamers that like I think a lot of people play these realize like, hey, you just need to have a solid bench so that when injuries happen, so you can put people in and out of your rotation, play matchups, all that good stuff. Just because you have a roster of 50 doesn't mean you can just throw out a bunch of risks and like throw out a bunch of darts, if you will. Sure, you can get a couple of those and hopefully one of them sticks, but you still have to have a lot of stability. And I'm just seeing not stable, like they're not good players, but they're players are going to play. They're not like names that you just don't know. Like they're talking about like Jack Sawinski is in at 700 ADP. John Birdie, Javier Baez,
I was
like
going
these
to
are
say the starting first baseman for the New York Yankees
yeah,
is at
exactly, yes.
755.
Well, like these are players that are playing and they find a way to play almost
Andy
every
Ibanez
day.
is down lower.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Whit
exactly.
Merrifield, like he found a way
Yep.
to play.
Edmundo Sosa.
So like Joey Gallo continues to find a way to play, and like these are just positional players. Like you still, and there's a lot of pitchers in here that I'm just like, oh okay, yeah, I can see him getting like a lot of them are relievers, obviously, but Martin Perez is down here in the 50th round. We have Drew Smiley. He like Anthony Bender. Like these are guys that are going to get opportunities to play, and they're going to be not not good, but like stable options on your bench that you're going to be like in a pinch. You can feel good about like having them on your bench so that you can throw them into your lineup in the right circumstances, or if push comes to shove. And I guess I just don't always expect that to be the case. Especially in those later rounds, you start getting to a point where like I don't know any of these players, and that's why a lot of people do
Right.
these drafts early on, right? Just to learn the player pool, just to get comfortable with it, and see these trends. I guess I'm just surprised to see some names on here and be like, oh, okay, yeah, like I can see myself playing or bidding on a lot of these guys in the early going in a 12 teamer, like streaming them, whether it's by position or because of need, early on in the season. I don't know if there's anybody out here that, stands out for you in this later rounds, but that was what I kind of noticed, at least just glancing over the bottom 10 rounds of this ADP board.
As you were talking, this I just went through a whole process in my head that I went should have figured out a long time ago. Every week during the season on this show, we talk about the value of some of these relievers that we do not expect to get saves from. But
Mhm.
when I'm drafting a draft and hold, the guys like that I draft are only ones that I see a path to getting saves at some point or
Sure.
hope that that could happen. But I end up with a draft and hold team at the end of the season with Jackson Jobe and Takea Roby that I never got to use all year,
Yeah,
right? Why am I picking those guys instead of guys that are down here? Like Brian Hudson was amazing for Milwaukee this year. We probably talked about him at least a couple of times
sure.
in the ratio categories of our show. Hunter Gaddis, one of, if not the best overall reliever, if we don't care about saves in baseball last year, is available down here. Yeah, that this is a change I'm making. No more speculating on minor league pitchers getting a call in the second half. It's Brian Hudson. It's Hunter Gaddis. These are the guys I'm drafting for my draft and holds.
I see Matt Brash down here. Like, I love to see
Yeah,
him come back this year and just
yeah,
shove. Nardi, even in the starter positions, you have Griffin Canning down here, Garrett Cleavinger of Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay does what they do. Yeah, so
yep.
just interesting to
Yeah,
see
he
what.
will get a couple of saves for you at some point.
Yeah. And there's position players down here. We named a bunch of them earlier, so
Yeah.
it's like knowing that you have a little bit more flexibility in your last couple rounds. Is good to know going into the final end of your draft. Anything else that stands out, especially in comparison to the draft you're doing right now, Kevin, as you get through the 14th round of your 12 teamer, versus what you see in the first 10 rounds of this draft, if I can really just jump around as much as possible as we're talking. But any other major things that kind of stand out in comparison between the two?
I mentioned Christian Walker earlier going later than I expected. And another example along the same lines, and for a similar reason, I believe, Adolis Garcia. We talked about him last week, and what I wish I had read about this prior to last week. Uh, I didn't realize how bad his knee was that he was playing through an injured knee. I think I had heard something about it, but didn't realize that it was it was a pretty big issue. And he's already had surgery, and he's going to be shut down for 8 weeks, but be back 100% in time for spring training. And after we talked about all of his numbers and stuff last week, and everything being fine except for the home runs weren't there this year, but everything else was the same. I am very back in on Adolis Garcia, especially as an 11th round pick where I got him. And so similarly to Christian Walker, I think he's dropping much further than he probably should due to playing through injury.
Yeah, just that idea where you realize, hey, this guy had such a down year. Why? You got to ask yourself why and look into
Yeah.
it. It
And
might not be the answer you thought, or even realized. Like, I didn't know Luis Ariz was playing through an injury, even though he still won the batting title. As soon as the Padres were eliminated, there you see a photo of him in in a hospital bed after having surgery on his thumb. I'm pretty sure it was his thumb. And obviously, you just don't always know if a guy is going through any kind of an injury throughout the season, especially if they play through it. And so,
right. And
mining the
yeah,
news,
so Adolis
mining the news.
Garcia, 55 picks difference, right? 82 is his min, 137 is max. And once again, only 2 drafts. So those
Yeah.
are the 2 spots he's been drafted. And my guess is one of these drafts, he was drafted prior to that article or tweet coming out that I saw and don't remember exactly where, and the other one after. And somebody thought the same way I'm thinking, like, oh, he was hurt. Let's grab him. And they jumped him up 55 picks from where he'd been picked in the other draft.
Right.
I love I could ramble and mumble about this stuff for hours, Adam. It's just fascinating. And then you find something that you think could be very, very useful. Like a little bit ago when I finally realized, why am I not drafting some of these relievers at the end of my 50 round drafts?
It's like it's like it's just the way I've always done it type of thing. It's like you get
Yes,
into a habit, you get
unfortunately.
into a rhythm, and you're
Yep,
just like, this is just what I know. This is what I do. And breaking those habits, it's hard. It's difficult, and you just have to force yourself to do it when it makes sense. Well, Kevin, instead of going on and rambling on about all these different things, why don't you leave us with some final thoughts process? Like this is ADP edits. Like we're talking about Saul samples. We're talking about 2 drafts. But it is fun to look at to see what kind of patterns start to develop, and then also taking all of this information with a grain of salt, because when you get into your draft, it's going to be completely different, at least in the next couple weeks. But sooner or later, this ADP will start driving drafts. Like they will start
exactly.
really
When they
driving
switch the
it home.
season over so that the draft room default rankings have to do with who's being drafted for 2025, uh, then that's really going to it really starts driving things. And that's what's so cool. I say this all the time during draft season when we're drafting, Adam. I think I've probably said it every season, multiple times. So at some point, I'll talk about a draft and I'll say, so the order obviously isn't exactly the same, but we're 200 players in and we've drafted 196 of the top 200 players in ADP, right?
Mm.
It just starts happening. It's not happening right now.
No, no,
Absolutely not happening at the moment. This is when you can truly uh, try
do your own
to
thing.
ignore ADP, because my point when I say that is, as much as we say we're ignoring ADP, we're not. Now, some of that is players are drafted where they're drafted for a reason. We think they're good players. But when you're getting that deep into drafts and there's only like 2 guys differentiated that have been drafted out of a couple hundred or even 3 or 400 at times when I bring it up, uh, people are drafting by ADP when that's the case.
There's no way around it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, go and as Uncle Ted says, go out there and get your guys. Don't worry about ADP.
Yes. Make
Uh,
your own queue. And you can
oh my,
import it, right? You only have to do it once, and you can every draft you do on the NFBC platform, you can just move it in there. It's that simple. Then you have your default ranking room.
yeah, just creating your own rankings at the beginning, and you can adjust them, and you can adjust them, and you can and toggle.
Absolutely.
You can have multiple. If I'm not mistaken, yeah, you can have multiple different
Multiple. Right.
rankings as
My
well.
I only have one right now because I'm in a draft, so I did get one going, and it's not 600 players like we're gonna draft. I don't have it done that far yet, but I can keep adding to it even though the draft's going on, and you name your different sets of rankings. You can
Yep.
choose which ones you wanna look at every draft. My names of my rankings is the date that I made them.
Oh, sure.
So then you can look you as you're drafting throughout draft season, you can say, "Well, what did I think last month?" and go look at that one and
Mhm.
know exactly what order I did those rankings in,
But
the different
if you
lists.
wanted to organize it by style of draft, you're gonna draft differently in a
Yeah,
gladiator than you are going to in a DC.
100%.
So, yeah,
Yes.
it's just great that you can have those. You can toggle between your 2 different, and you can use different rankings that you've created and that you trust. Hopefully, you trust yourself more than you
Uncle
trust
Ted, some
ADP.
leagues pitching's much more valuable than hitting and vice versa in other leagues. It's
Yeah,
perfect.
and you got to adjust.
Uh,
So if you can
yeah.
actually create rankings like that as well, you could talk like, oh, the draft room is going really heavy on pitching. Let me toggle to my pitching first rankings as well. So it's like just different ways of prioritizing your ranks. All right, guys. Well, that is going to do it. I'm sure this will not be the last time we talk about ADP, but we're going to close it out right here. Thanks for listening. This has been episode 185 of On the Wire. On behalf of Kevin Hasting, I am Adam Howe. Thanks for listening, and we bid you goodbye.